of you may know Eric Jolly, who's the president of the Science Museum of Minnesota. And he and I are long-term research collaborators as well as friends. And what happened is we started talking about why is it that there's been so much research and so much evaluation about diversity programs, and yet we don't yet know a whole lot, and even more, the programs have, for the most part, not had the degree of success that we would have hoped. So based on that, we started talking about what's going on with the research and evaluation pieces. And then the National Science Foundation came to us and said, okay, you're practical. Figure out what's going on. And what this led to was Beyond Rigor. Beyond Rigor's a philosophy, Beyond Rigor's a website. Beyond Rigor, the thing behind Beyond Rigor is rigor is necessary but not sufficient. So, I can never do this one. Okay, maybe that one? Yeah, good. So this is kind of a strange way to start. Let's just think about these three questions, okay? They're actually related. And my favorite is, what can bomb-sniffing dogs teach us about why we don't know more about what works and what doesn't work in science education or medical education? Well, there's a story. Even those of you who don't know me knew there was a story, right? Went to the White House with my grandson and the rest of the family. Okay, so when you go through the bomb-sniffing dogs, there are barriers so that the handlers for the dogs cannot see you. The reason they have those barriers is because if the handlers can see you, the dogs are less accurate. Why are the dogs less accurate? Because somehow, through the communication, through the holding of the dog's leash, the handler communicates to the dog some of their feelings based just on what they've seen. Handlers can't see, better, dogs do better. So when you think about, I know, isn't that wild? And you know the weirdest thing, I was telling this story and somebody said, my brother-in-law's in the Air Force, he handles a bomb-sniffing dog, they know the research, but they won't believe it. So the White House is the only place where the handlers can't see who you are. The impressions, the impact that people have based on their perceptions of other people, based on their appearance, based on all kinds of things, has a huge impact on their judgments. It has a particularly huge impact on their judgments when we're talking about underrepresented people. The couple of the stories there, okay. You know, musicians, when now the auditions for orchestras and things like that are blind. No, they used to be blind because they'd have a curtain, but the curtain didn't go all the way down. So then the judge, right, you got it, they looked at the shoes, yes. And when they totally covered it up so that the judges could not see who the people were, women were much more apt to get the jobs, women of all races, and men of color were more apt to get the jobs. So think about that. Think about dogs and bombs the next time that you are interviewing people for graduate school, for medical school, for residencies. It makes a huge difference. It also makes a huge difference when you're doing research and evaluation that's based on observations, that's based on interviews. Think dogs. Second question. In this crowd, I'm assuming everybody knows the answer to this. Writing down your sex and or race ethnicity prior to taking the test has an impact on your test scores if you are female, if you are of color. If you are judging your basketball ability, it also has an impact on white men's scores. Honest and true. Yes. The whole concept of stereotype threat is huge and it has an incredible impact on test scores, on things like that. This is not a hard thing to deal with. If you're doing research, if you're doing evaluation, if you're doing any kind of testing, judgment kind of thing, put the demographic information at the end. We know this. We don't do this. And this part is really easy. Putting the demographic information at the end has a huge impact. And by the way, you're keeping time. Somebody's keeping time because, believe me, I can go on this until Tuesday, and you would not be happy. Or maybe you would, I don't know. Okay, this last one. When can reporting results by race be wrong? It can be wrong if all you look at is race, because you're drawing all kinds of conclusions based on totally inaccurate data. This part depressed the heck out of me. White Americans have 22 times the wealth of African Americans and 15 times the wealth of Hispanics. But, you know, when we're looking at programs, when we're looking at what's going on, we just look at race, because what difference could 22 times the wealth have on nutrition, access to computers, books, health? Obviously nothing. 22 times, that's not a huge number. So when we just look at race, and we don't look at any of those other confounding variables, the conclusions we're going to draw are going to be incomplete at best, inaccurate at worst, and stupid. So that's what Beyond Rigor is about. And, oh yes, I have brochures. Because what we were looking at is what are some ways in research and evaluation we can make sure the data is more accurate, the analysis is appropriate, and it's the right data. And, okay, I love the fish. We also wanted to remind everybody that wherever we're looking at this, whether it's in our research or a program evaluation, we're swimming in a sea of context. You can't. I was interviewing graduate students in the biomedical sciences in the Northeast. The year after Sandy, I cried through a lot of the interviews because so many of the students had lost their research. Our study results, taken without the context of Hurricane Sandy, would be totally inaccurate, because these students were having so much more difficulty. They had lost research, they had to put more time in, some of them left. Hurricane Sandy didn't figure into our initial research protocol, but Hurricane Sandy certainly had a huge impact on the research results. And that kind of context, that's part of just the context in general that we need to think about. So I'm just going to sucker you into going to the website by just kind of teasing you a little bit about just some of the things, and all these tips are research-based, and oh, believe me, they all have references, and you can go read them, and all that kind of stuff. Just some of the things to think about when we're thinking about making data more accurate. Now, all right, the demographic thing I just keep saying all the time because it makes me crazy. But very often, when it comes to defining race, ethnicity, and disability status, we don't ask the participants. We give them a list where you can only check off one, sometimes you can check off more than one, or in a lot of cases, we figure it out ourselves. Not so good. We don't check to see if the measures have been tested and validated with groups similar to the groups that are going to be given the measures. When we're talking about, well, at lunch, when Dr. Slater was talking about it, medical boards. When we're talking about entrance exams, have they been validated on the different groups? Because if they've just been validated in general, they are not necessarily valid or equally valid for underrepresented minorities or any other group. All those things are things, whether it's a survey that you're giving out or whether it's something as high stakes as board exams. If they're not validated for the 4 specific groups, they're not necessarily accurate. So we got accurate data. I talk a lot about that. Appropriate analysis. I know you can go crazy with how small a group that you break it down to, but if you don't think about breaking things down, then you're going to be drawing conclusions that may not be right. How often, and we've had the statistics here today because you don't have a lot of choice sometimes. We have statistics for women, and we have statistics for underrepresented minorities. You don't exist, or you're bimodal, whatever, but you're not there, okay? When we look at those, we often don't look at the intersection of gender and race ethnicity. So I'm picking on Brandy because I was on a panel with her. So does Brandy fit into the women's category? Does Brandy fit into the men and women category of underrepresented? Or Brandy doesn't have a category? And we need to have those categories. If we're going to draw conclusions about programs, about pipeline programs, we need to figure out what works for whom. And if we don't know who whom is, then we're not going to know if it works for them. You can't break it out by everything, but you certainly need to be thinking about what the way the data needs to be broken out and why. Oh yeah, don't forget those confounding variables. Oh, one of the other things about the accurate data that makes me a little crazy is that when we're doing work on what works and what doesn't work, we only do work like on effective programs. A friend and I, Tony Klool, did a book on good schools in poor neighborhoods. And what we did is we compared demographically similar good schools and demographically similar, well, crappy schools. And we found that they had a lot of things in common. There were some things that were different, but they had a lot of things in common. So if we only look at effective programs, there may be a whole lot of things that are in there that aren't helpful, that don't make a difference. But you're not going to know that unless you look at effective and more effective and less effective programs. Okay, appropriate analysis. The right data. There's a lot of stuff in here. I would suggest that one of the things that we don't do when we're evaluating pipeline programs is talk to the stakeholders. That would include, like, oh, I don't know, the participants. What information is important for them? What do they want to know about? I know we make judgments about the programs based on what the funder wants. Of course, the funder wants it. But if we find out why the participants are there, what the participants want to get out of it, it may be a program that isn't that successful in terms of the funder's criteria, is dramatically successful in terms of the participants' criteria. Or vice versa. The funder may be thrilled with the results. Everybody's going to go off and try to get an R01. The students are really depressed because they know almost no one's going to go out and get an R01. So you need, for the right data, you need to look at that. All right, so what else? I talked a little bit about context, but I'm going to stop. And yes, you know I'm going to go out and ask you, so be sure to write this down. Okay, in the next 15 seconds, think about a list of words that describes who you are. How about here? What are some of the words that describe who you are?
Latina. Catholic.
Latina, Catholic.
New York City.
New York City. How about you?
African-American.
African-American, woman, doctor, teacher, and I missed the last one. Mother and wife. How about one more from here? How about you?
Teacher.
Great. All right, that was only one word. How about one more? we've discovered, one, a lot about each other. We've also discovered that the characteristics that are most important to us, the characteristics that kind of bring us together and define who we are quite different, and that's kind of important. And that's particularly important when we're doing research and evaluation. The heck of this. Okay. There are two things that really need to drive our work. One is that all of us as individuals are demographically multidimensional. If you just look at me and say, oh, she's a woman, she must be really, she's a white woman, we'll go that far. She must be really into cooperation. When I did triathlons, I would find the woman whose body I wanted and I would beat her. If you generalize for things that are going to work for me, just based on the fact that I'm female, your programs are not going to be successful. The other part, when we're looking about programs in research and evaluation, in the US, diverse means, oh right, diverse means black and brown. And if we don't have anybody black and brown, then obviously the population isn't diverse. All populations are diverse. Some of those diversities may not be visible. Disability is often not visible. Sexual orientation often isn't visible. So when we're talking about evaluating programs or even designing programs, we have to remember both of those things. This is key to the success of any program. All right, and so when we're talking about some of the issues that are key, when we're talking about disability is an area when you're talking about program planning, but when you're also talking about evaluation, we're very concerned about helping people with disabilities, which is great. But we need to figure out what that means. We need to be aware of things like the sensitivity of some people don't want to self-disclose. And there's some really good reasons about that. And that some people in staffs and programs and evaluations aren't that comfortable with people with visible disabilities. That's a problem. These are all things that need to be taken into account when you're talking about evaluations, when you're talking about research, and when you're talking about program design. Oh, okay, I gotta put this in for the race ethnicity thing, because looking at me, a lot of you can probably tell that I am Irish Catholic, born in Worcester. You probably didn't know that 150 years ago, I had my own race. Irish was a race in Massachusetts and other parts of New England. Irish is no longer a race. I'm not exactly sure what happened. But the kinds of assumptions that we make about race are social constructs. And when we're designing programs and when we are evaluating programs, we better be very, very careful about the kind of conclusions that we draw based on race and ethnicity, since we're operating under assumptions that race and ethnicity are kind of genetic constants. That has a huge impact on the results that we draw, and of course the stuff that's dealt with them. All right. Oh yes, and I had to throw in something about culture. And I really liked, Vicky, were you the one that did the part about the definition of diversity, the expansion of diversity in culture? Because culture is any group with shared patterns of behavior and understandings. And yes, it could be Boston Red Sox fans. And when we're working with different groups for different cultures, if we don't understand the major pieces of those cultures, and yes, I can do it on all kinds of race and ethnicity, but the heck with it. go into a bunch of Boston Red Sox fans with a Yankee hat on, and, right, and meet a focus group. Exactly. We understand that culture. We know that's a mistake. If we don't understand the cultures with whom we're working, we're going to make mistakes just as big as that Yankee cap. Well, hopefully, the response won't be quite as violent. So, all right, there are lots of different cultures. There are things that we can think about that will help us understand which contextual factors are salient. What's important? Certainly, Hurricane Sandy, what can confound project results? How participants identify themselves. Wow, you don't look Hispanic to me. That's a good way to get good data. What's going on in the surrounding communities? All those kind of things. So we did stuff for program officers to think about too, but we don't have any program officers, so I don't care about that. But the one thing that I would like to leave you with, what we've done in the whole Beyond Rigor is our biggest thrust is on those areas we've been covering. But also, there are a lot of really useful diversity-related evaluation resources. And so what we did on the website, and my partner and husband, Tom Kibler, gets credit for this, is we took all of these fabulous resources, but they're all, like large PDFs, and broke them down by things you might be interested in. So that when you click on them, it goes directly to the page. It doesn't give you a whole huge PDF to download, it goes to the page. So we invite you to come to beyondrigor.org. More importantly, we strongly urge you to think about these kinds of things when you're doing evaluation, when you're doing research, and when you're designing programs. And then call me and yell at me if you have any good ideas to add. Okay? Thanks.